Well, thanks for having me. It's kind of awkward hearing the bio of yourself like standing right next to you, but I'm excited to be here. There's a lot of importance of education. If I could, I would just be a perpetual student, and unfortunately, you need money to live. So I got accepted way back when to the U and to Westminster and to a couple other places. I originally accepted admittance to the U and went on my first class, and it was just a huge auditorium of people, and I couldn't take it. It was just like an assembly for a class, and so I decided to switch to Westminster, and it was way better. I actually took a few courses here at Slick way back when for concurrent enrollment and some other classes, and so I had a few credits that were able to transfer. So I went to Westminster. I graduated in marketing and finance, so I got a double major, basically because I love business. I really enjoyed having kind of both ends of the spectrum of the creative side and more of the kind of math side. And so finance was my first passion. And for the double major degree, you were required to do an internship for both proficiencies. And so I did an internship for Smith Barney. And the broker just had me cold calling the whole time, and that was like my first real foray into finance. And I kind of decided, I don't really like the cold calling aspect. It's definitely not fun, and it wasn't that promising as a career in finance. And so I kind of swayed a little bit more towards the marketing side, and I'm really glad I did, because it requires you to be very quick on your feet and still adapt and use all of those things from the finance side, but also, be creative. You're kind of forced to be creative and have kind of a different way of thinking. And with marketing, every day is different, and that's really what I liked about the field of marketing. So I pursued more of a career in marketing after doing the internship for my marketing side of the degree. I was actually an intern for Richter 7, which is an advertising agency. They've expanded and contracted over the years, but at the time they were the best advertising agency in the state and in the city. And so the big account that Richter 7 had was Zions Bank. And so after my internship concluded in May, I got hired on there as an assistant full-time. And so I was basically, doing a lot of the grunt work, starting out in advertising. It was billing, it was, random project questions, and, getting coffee for people and all of that fun, cliche advertising stuff. And so our client at the time was Zions Bank, which was, a huge account. The advertising account was millions of dollars, and at the time I really didn't have any idea of how big they were as a client. And so at that time, it was maybe June or July of 2007, they put the account under review, which means that they send out a request for proposal to advertising agencies in the city, in the area, that want to bid for their business. And so what happened was we were the incumbent advertising agency of record for Zions Bank for, I think it was at the time, 18 years, which in advertising lifetimes is like a dozen lifetimes. Usually clients switch their agencies pretty frequently just to stay competitive and for other reasons and things like that. So they put the account under review and went with Thomas Arts, who I think you talked with, Sean Butler, who worked for them for a number of years. And so it was funny, they kind of switched to become for the traditional side of the advertising account, the agency of record. The digital stuff still was maintained by Richter 7 for a few years after that. So kind of split the business because Richter 7 had a lot of digital proficiencies that were really kind of ahead of the game at the time. And so that business kind of got split. So the traditional advertising account went to Thomas Arts and the digital stuff stayed with Richter 7. unfortunately, losing that big of an account, over 18 years, you just end an advertising relationship and you don't have all of that advertising income. And so they were forced to lay off, I think it was like almost half of their workforce. And that was the week of Thanksgiving. I kind of remember it pretty vividly. It was, coming back from lunch, and it was like the Monday or Tuesday before Thanksgiving, and I see people with boxes, walking down the hall, and kind of, misty-eyed, and I'm like, oh, that's weird. What's going on? And at the time, I had only had, 8 months of professional experience, and so I was very new. And so I'm like, that's weird. Like, that really sucks. Like, I don't know what happened, but maybe they got fired or something. I don't know. And so, coming back from lunch, I go upstairs and had a talk with my manager and my manager's manager, and had all of these exit interviews. And so that was my first real professional layoff. Hopefully in your lifetime, when you pick a career, you don't get laid off at all. And so to have that happen to me in the first year of my professional career wasn't good for my psyche and my confidence and all of that fun stuff. And so it was a pretty tough time starting out, trying to make a name for yourself, getting really good relevant experience, and that happens. And so it kind of set me back, and it was, making me question my path. Should I have gone with finance? Should I pick a different career entirely? Like, what do I do, type of thing. And it was pretty disheartening for a time. And so 2008 comes, and the beginning of the year, I just, luckily, and depending on how you look at it, advertising agencies are very connected in the community. They're like families, which is good and bad. If you have people that you like, chances are you'll end up working with them on the same team, or as their client, or as their agency type of relationship. And so I had a couple of people reach out to me, and I was able to move on to a different advertising agency at the time, Richter, and they are based out of Phoenix. And so they have satellite offices here in Salt Lake, and they have some in Denver. And they were, at the time, probably like second or third or fourth on the list of, top advertising agencies in the state. And they kind of had a very different, their book of accounts and their way of doing things were very different from Richter 7. And I learned a lot really fast. In that condensed amount of time, with advertising anyway, things move very quickly. It's really awesome that you get kind of a very attention to detail, multitasking type of background, because that's kind of what you need to survive in the advertising agency world. You have to be able to be very agile and learn on the fly very quickly, be friends with a lot of different people and things like that. So the accounts that I worked on were really fun. I got to work on a lot of really cool projects and campaigns for all of the clients. There were a couple, for example, Clark Planetarium was their client at the time. Culligan Water was probably their Zions Bank, I would think. They spanned across the entire country, and they were structured a little differently. They were kind of co-op based, which in the advertising world means a completely different thing from other things. So I had to learn a lot really fast, and it was really, really good experience. The main Culligan account, I believe, went with another agency as well. And so twice in 2 years, I had to experience this horrible thing of getting laid off, not because of my professional acumen. It was literally, we don't have money to pay your salary. And so hearing that, I was like, okay, I really feel like this is a sign. Twice in 2 years, getting laid off at an advertising agency. Something's gotta give. I either need to switch it up or do something different, or switch careers even, which is kind of a big deal. So I decided, I'm gonna take my time with this. I filed for unemployment. I went to take the GMAT. I studied really hard. I got accepted into a few colleges, and I was just applying everywhere, and this opportunity came up to go to Greece for a summer, and I sat back and thought really hard, and I said, okay, this makes sense for me, and it was really, really a fun experience. So that that whole thing was a once-in-a-lifetime experience that I actually got to experience twice. But that allowed me to basically reset my line of thinking. And at the end of the summer, one of my coworkers at Richter actually got accepted to an MBA program in Chicago. And so my old manager emailed me while I was still in Greece and said, hey, this guy's leaving to get his MBA. Do you want to basically take his spot and take over all of his book of business? And so I said, yeah, that's actually a really good idea. I'm going to do that and take advantage of that. And so I still wasn't really sure about advertising as a career. And obviously looking back on it, you know, hindsight's 2020, the 2008 year and leading up to that, probably 18 months was the worst, I think, in advertising history for the state of Utah, like really, really bad. So that was an outlier. And at the time, it kind of shaped where I wanted to go and what I found was my passion. And so the agency side moves very fast, and unfortunately that means turnover with their, you know, workforce as well. So essentially what happened was coming back from Greece, I decided to go get my MBA because I like being a student. I like school. I love constantly learning, being ahead of the trends and all of that fun stuff. And so I thought really hard about that, and I said, okay, I'm going to California. I love Southern California. I got accepted to Chapman University for their MBA program. I was very excited. It was pretty much a done deal, and I went on a campus visit just to scope it out. It was kind of like a, you know, dotting I's and crossing T's, because it was pretty much ready to go, just figuring out, you know, financial aid and all of that stuff. And so on the weekend of my campus visit, I got a call from, at the time, who was my brother-in-law, saying, hey, we've got this new interactive marketing division that we're creating for Zions Bank Corporation, which is the holding company for Zions Bank. They're kind of the umbrella company for a lot of other affiliate banks in the West. So they've got California Bank and Trust, they've got Vectra Bank in Colorado, a whole bunch of different affiliate banks. And so I thought to myself, does it make sense to go into $50,000 more in debt for school student loans, or should I make money and, you know, learn a few things and get skills to have a salary and pay off my Westminster student loans, which are also still very big? So I decided, you know, after a lot of soul searching, to take this opportunity at Zions Bank, and I'm really glad I did, because it was and is still one of the best learning experiences that I've ever had. And so I've been there 8 years in March, this next March, so 7.5 years. And time goes by really fast. Marketing for a bank is not fun. My brother-in-law really had to sell me on it, because I was really stoked to go to California, and he had to convince me, you know, this is a good idea, marketing a bank, yeah, because he had at the time been there for maybe 10 years before me. And so he said it's a very different beast, even though you may not believe that you're a banker. I didn't want to be a banker. That wasn't my career path. I had a part-time job as a teller, but I wouldn't call myself a banker. And I actually still don't, because there's a lot of weird negative connotations now in the industry for finance that you don't want to be associated as a banker. But even that aside, I still don't consider myself a banker. And marketing a bank is very different than marketing any other company or industry, really. With retail, it's really easy. If you're a Coke or someone else, you can, offer sales or different promotions. For a bank, you don't really get to do that. It's not like you can say, we're going to give you X rate on your savings account or something if you're a client, or for this promotion or whatever. There's no buy one, get one free type of thing. So it's very different as far as marketing a bank, which is actually really awesome, because you have to be more strategic to refine your marketing skills. Not to say that it's easier than marketing a different industry, but in a lot of cases, you're going to have to be more agile and strategic, and really think about how you adapt real-time marketing strategy to a bank. And so that's kind of what I learned. At the beginning, I was brought on to be a social media manager, and so I was a part of the team that finished the social media business case. Now this was 2010, so at the time it was like definitely the downfall of MySpace. Facebook was kind of on the rise as far as popularity. Snapchat wasn't really a thing. LinkedIn was on the rise. There was a lot of moving parts in the social media landscape. And so I had to navigate that from, again, marketing a bank perspective. And it really wasn't fun. I mean, it's a bank, so it's boring. There's not a lot of fun products and services. And so it's just, it's kind of a grueling effort. And so I had to really adapt to that. And I really liked it because it made me think it made me think about all of the marketing fundamentals and advertising fundamentals in a very different way, because banks are just so different and they're very highly regulated that it's almost, they're maybe 2 or 3 years behind where the marketing industry is, unless you're a big, you know, Capital One or Wells Fargo type of bank. You're not gonna, and even then, you're still going to have a lot of hurdles to try and overcome, and things move quite a bit slower for a bank. So it's having, so we kind of talked about that, having the timeline go through. So I started as a social media administrator, and at the time, it was 2010, no one had social media marketing experience. The whole resume line was, I have a Facebook, and that's not really, you know, social media experience, but no one had that at the time, so they took a big chance on me, and I guess it helped having someone that I knew kind of shepherd me into this role and become what they wanted for that particular role, because social media, even in a marketing landscape not for a bank, it was still very young and nascent, and so doing that for a bank and starting from scratch really was pretty helpful in discovering what my passion was for digital marketing and interactive, you know, the interactive space, and how that applies to a bank and marketing a bank, because it's very different. And so I was a part of the team that wrote the business case, working with all of our stakeholders in the bank: legal, compliance, risk, information security, technology, all of those, you know, different stakeholders, and come up with an overall strategy for the entire enterprise to use. And that probably gave me a lot of, it probably accelerated my professional growth more than any other opportunity I've had, because that was, you know, starting from scratch. The company was starting from scratch when it came to social media, so it was really defining what that strategy was and doing it in a way that made sense for moving the bank forward, as well as digital marketing in general. So it was really, you know, coming up with the business case for Facebook. Why would a bank be on Facebook? Like, I don't want to be friends with my bank on Facebook. I still don't. And so it's kind of hard to try and answer that question as a professional marketer, to say, here's why you want to be friends with your bank on Facebook, and we're gonna show you all of the reasons why. And so trying to answer that question still to this day, not being a part of social media, but still really involved in social media, you still have to try and answer that question. Why would you engage with a bank on digital channels? Because right now, you know, mobile is very, very important. Back in the day when the iPad first came out, was actually 2010, and funny story, I worked at the Apple store at the time before I went on my second Greece excursion, and I was the first person in the state of Utah to open the first iPad, the original iPad. I worked at the Apple store at the Gateway, and at midnight we did like the rolling launch of the product, and you know, it was really fun to just see that really big iPod in your hands and see what it's done over the years. And it's really defined a lot of different banking trends and different digital marketing trends. So the advent of the tablet has really kind of evolved a lot in those 7 years. So back in, 2010, 2011, we had to, tablet banking was the buzzword, and what do we do to be on iPads, and how do we make our website mobile friendly, whether it's mobile optimized or responsive to devices, different things like that that are really my passion. And so working with all of those teams, it was very difficult, again, being a bank, moving very slowly to create and set those trends for not just digital marketing, but the bank's digital marketing efforts. And luckily we had some really good partners to help us. Our agency partners in Richter 7 and Thomas Art's digital team, really kind of helped propel us forward. So there's a lot of trend setting. Again, working for a bank doesn't sound like it's all that fun. And to be fair, it is still pretty boring, but I do like it. It's definitely, an admirable, depending on which perspective you look at, profession to be in. So from a few years ago, that interactive group that I started with got dissolved and merged into the Zions Bank corporate marketing department. And so we weren't Zions Bank Corporation anymore. We were now Zions Bank Marketing. And so that transition came with a lot of differences, I guess you could say. There was a lot of adjusting and transitioning to not being like the umbrella entity, but now you're delivering marketing strategies for all these affiliate banks, and now you're the one. It was kind of like a mini agency, to be quite honest. We would design all of these campaigns and do analytics and all of that stuff for all of these affiliate banks, and it was up to them to basically adapt and use it. And so now being on that side, the client side, it was, okay, put your money where your mouth is and actually do the things that you spec'd out to do. And so that was kind of cool to transition into that role. And from there, I moved into more of a kind of project manager role. I was driving a lot of the strategy for the business. So we separated it kind of like business lines. So a few of our team members on the business line team would cover specific business lines. So I had, for example, all of the channel products. So on the retail side, there's all of the, bill pay, mobile banking, e-statements, online banking, all of that stuff. The marketing for those interactive services was my business line. So I would drive a lot of the strategy, the end-to-end project management, the analytics, the ROI, all of that, fun stuff. And so what it became was a lot of traditional marketing, like flyers and advertisements in print and radio ads and scripting. And while that's fun, that was fun for me like 10 years ago, and I don't really enjoy that non-digital aspect. The traditional side is really still needed and important, but digital is much more important in the scope of kind of marketing and branding, at least for this company. And so this year I took a different position with the same marketing group, just as the digital marketing manager. So back to what I have a passion for, which is retargeting and paid search and display, programmatic and TV and all of that, just online nerdy marketing stuff. So I get to do a little coding, and I get to work a lot with different stakeholders, and so that's really fun. The project cycles are way longer than being on the project management side, and so that's been a little bit of an adjustment, just because you're not delivering something every day. It's like we need to figure out how to track our retargeting efforts. So what does that look like for making sure the tracking codes are on the correct pages on the website, and making sure they're firing properly, and all of that fun stuff. So that's kind of the background of where I've been. And I wanted to just, from a more educational standpoint, provide some things that we're doing in the marketing industry and what they mean to a bank. Because a lot of other companies are still doing this, but they may have done it like 2 to 3 years ago, or they may have already adopted it and they're on their next phase, or whatever that life cycle looks like. So a lot of what we're doing now is, we're a bank, so we have a lot of information about all of our clients, and that gets really creepy sometimes because you can do some really creepy things, and that's kind of what we're trying not to do, is to be very creepy. And so, what's that?
Show up to their door with flowers.
Yeah, well, the thing is we know all of the transactions, right? So we know what you shop, like all the sites and how much you spend and where. And so trying to do that, trying to target to those types of people in a very non-intrusive way is kind of a catch-22. It's almost impossible. So it's trying to find that balance of not being really Big Brother intrusive in every kind of digital footprint that you leave, but it's also very effective. And so I think just trying to find that balance of not being intrusive, but also being really intelligent about how we target different ads. I think, from a consumer perspective myself, I hate that everything I do is online. Every single thing is captured some way. Even if you go private or incognito mode, or, all of that stuff is still captured. There's ways to do that and to still track that footprint. Yeah, I think that's definitely the more interesting part about digital marketing is identifying those opportunities. Like, for example, I went to a restaurant by my house, and I didn't post food pictures on Instagram. I just made a purchase. I used my card, ate my fries, I was on my way. And then the next day, I was on Twitter and found a whole bunch of ads in my feed. And I still, to this day, don't know how they did it. I'm not sure if it was just an eerie coincidence, but it's things like that that make you go, okay, are you actually tracking me? How are you tracking me? Why are you tracking me? What do you want with my information? And so it almost puts you on the defensive. So I guess that's an example of how it's intrusive and really kind of, okay, this is weird. I have to, back off with what I do, even though what you do still is trackable, which is interesting. It's a little creepy.
Super creepy.
I mean, I don't like it, if it's used in a non-creepy way. I mean, if you're trying to sell me something, how are you going to get me to buy it? The whole touch point of marketing or advertising is very broad, and there's quite a few ways to personalize and to thereby attribute what particular marketing touch points you're trying to get the customer through in that particular funnel, right? So more for awareness, I have no idea who this brand is. I'm gonna go to an outdoor billboard on the freeway, and then I'm gonna do a display ad on the websites that you visit. And so that's a good way to get awareness out there for the very top of the funnel. And then from there, as your interest or your acknowledgement of that brand's digital whatever, or even physical in some cases, print and radio and TV type of experiences, that changes the strategy of how you communicate that. And the good thing about digital is that you can track everything, so that's good and bad. But for us as marketers on the back end, it's really effective, and it's really efficient for saying, okay, as far as personalization, for an example, if you're a client of Zions Bank and you visit zionsbank.com, chances are if you're already a client, you're going to zionsbank.com to log into your online banking, and you're looking at, if you're not on your mobile device, because for me, I would be on the mobile banking app versus m.zionsbank.com or zionsbank.com and log in from a desktop experience. To you guys, that is all online banking. To us, those are three different modalities of, through which you can access your financial information. So depending on where you're at, if you're already a client, you're logging into online banking, we know certain things about that client. And so to say, say they're logging in to look at their checking account, we're not going to market a checking account to them because that's stupid and that's a waste of money. It's a waste of an impression. Because right now you're kind of battling for attention in this space. I mean, our attention spans are very limited. I'm sure you've done like 10 other things just listening to me in this last half hour, which is fine. I'm not offended. I do it too, and I think people are aware of that. And so as marketers, you need to be very creative in how you approach those scenarios to target and to look at a particular audience. And so that is kind of the spectrum of, okay, we want to battle for attention and we're going to pay for a very targeted impression, whether that's on your online banking logging in, whether it's in online banking, there's an ad, whether it's logging out of online banking, or after that experience of, okay, I've visited zionsbank.com, we can then look at other websites you visit and target ads based on those websites. So in a sense, it's not that we have, it's not like from Zions Bank's perspective, we know all the websites you visit. We actually don't. But what we do is say, okay, we know that they're a client. We're going to follow them on the websites that they might need a credit card, or utilizing a home equity credit line or something that, if people, we know a lot of data. I mean, there's a ton of data with our own first-party clients, but there's also a lot of shopping data. People that go to HomeDepot.com or Best Buy or Amazon, all of those categories of websites that people visit, we can group up and target based on what we want to sell them. So, for example, we've got a home equity credit line product that is a very competitive rate in the market. And most people use home equity credit lines from the data that we have for either vacations or for home improvement. And so what we want to do is, if you're already an existing home equity credit line client, if you've applied for the line and you've got an open credit line but you're not using it, that is attractive to us so that we can say, okay, you might have things that you want to spend money on. You should use your already available home equity credit line to pay for that. And so from there, we know that if they spend it on vacations or home improvements are the top two, we can then go to sites like Kayak or Travelocity or Home Depot or Lowe's or any of those sites in that category and target display ads for that particular product. So that's kind of a high-level example of how we're utilizing personalization in a digital space. Yeah, I think as a marketing department within Zions Bank, that task falls to us, to be quite honest. We obviously have stakeholders that have a vested interest in kind of maintaining, from a shareholder perspective, ethical responsibility, but I'm not sure that it is really, I mean, it's not regulated. It's not like we have to be ethical up to a certain percent. So it really literally is subjective based on the risk tolerance of the bank. And I will say that Zions Bank is not very risk tolerant. They are probably one of the more or most risk-averse companies, banks, financial institutions in the state. So that's just fact. I mean, we don't get marketing initiatives through because it's too risky. Yeah. And so whatever that means, however you interpret that, much to my chagrin, because a lot of projects that I want to push through are classified as too risky and we can't do them, or they delay into a black hole and we still don't do them. And so it's kind of shocking how much we could press it. And it really is up to our executive vice president to kind of, as a marketing entity, not violate that, because we also have a real huge responsibility of not losing trust in our clients. I mean, if we don't have trust, then they're going to go to a credit union. They're going to go to Mountain America or one of our main competitors. We don't. There's very little room to make errors, whether it's ethical or otherwise. So, yeah, that's a good question. I might pass that on because go ahead. The EA stuff is very interesting. I think there's been quite a bit of there's been a lot of controversy around that, and I am on the side of like EA is a demonic institution and needs to be regulated. Well, and it's not entirely apparent the repercussions showing themselves. I mean, they show themselves in very different ways, and there's a very large time decay with that as well. You won't acknowledge or analyze the effects that has until way longer or in way different scenarios than you might have anticipated. So that's okay. We can circle back. I think we've got almost an equal amount of responsibility in making sure that things like that, whatever the outcome is, we as bank marketers need to make sure that we don't touch that, with a 50-foot pole. And so when it comes to, the ethical slider and where you want to be, Zions Bank just in general is going to be on that no risk end of the slider by nature. And so it's not dissimilar to this whole EA controversy, but it is our responsibility to make sure that we use that information about clients to the best of our ability and to not force our clients to hate us, because it really is just like a two-way street. If you don't trust a bank, why would you bank with them? Like, I would switch banks in a heartbeat if I knew they were doing any sort of, or if it seemed like and they weren't actually doing any sort of exploitative anything. So I think that's important to note. Yeah. So real quick, I can just kind of finish with these final slides. We've kind of talked about this a little bit. We do audience targeting, so we leverage that first-party data to target customer segments via person and account based on social and other digital channels. We kind of talked about that. We're doing it in a very strategic way with excluding segments. So if we know that they fit a certain profile that we don't want to market to, or if they already have a product like we talked about, we can exclude them, thereby not wasting our ad dollar for that impression. And then also creative testing. This is something that we're not the best at right now, but we are kind of going into, we changed our website platform, and so that's going to allow us to be agile in testing certain, creative concepts and button placements and calls to action and things like that. So all of that is really helps to iterate and to optimize really quickly. That's one of the really good things about digital, is that you can take a certain amount of time and test and optimize to a different end result, whatever that different lever is that you pull on the targeting scale. And then we look at attribution modeling. Again, we kind of talked about this, looking at better tracking. And this is a very interesting question. If you have a touch point with the brand, where do you think that decision was made to purchase? And so that's called attribution modeling. Is it the first touch? Is it the last click? Is it a time decay where over time you kind of get sold on a brand or their product in the marketplace? And so there's very different philosophies on, what attribution model is best for a company. Definitely makes sense based on the company's goals. For us, we've always done last click, which is interesting because I personally think that there's a lot more that goes into a decision or a purchasing behavior that isn't the last click. I'm sure all of you guys do research online, you ask friends, you get influenced by TV and radio and everything that influences your decision to buy anything. And so how we track that on the back end as marketers is really kind of an interesting question. And then just finally ending with some industry trends. Digital is king, if I haven't kind of expressed that enough. Retargeting, SEO, display, programmatic, and TV. I can go into any of those if you'd like. Way many years ago, content is king was the tagline, and it definitely is still king, but as far as strategizing how you publish content that is that kind of king is very, very important. And so latent semantic indexing is a real nerdy word to kind of spreading out your keyword strategy. So instead of, you know, car repair, it's automobile repair or how to fix your automobiles, you know, that type of, that's basically what that means. And so in all of our content creation, we have to take LSI into account so that it's more organic and doesn't feel like it's stuffing keywords like a bot crawling a website. So competing and bidding for individual attention in hopes of groundswell is also kind of at the forefront of what digital marketing is in general. And mobile evolution is still important for distinguishing brands. I think with all of the devices that have come up over the years and all of the ones that have come to the forefront of popularity, having a great mobile experience is pretty important to a brand's success online. And so we have just, like I mentioned before, we've switched our website platform to be mobile optimized and responsive. So whatever breakpoint you're on a device, if you're on a website browser, if you're on a mobile app, it's going to look the same. You'll have the same experience. And we've actually, as Zions Bank, we've been penalized a lot for not having a good mobile experience. So that's something that we've improved just recently and hope to evolve that over time with, you know, really interesting personalization aspects. I think that's pretty important for my role, honestly. We've never had a digital marketing manager at the bank before. All of our digital has been handled by the agency, Thomas Arts, and then before that, Richter 7. So there hasn't been that representative on the bank side to say, hey, we need to dictate what the agencies are doing for us rather than them pushing all of that or doing it on our behalf. And so those decisions are the marketing team's decisions to say, you know, this is important enough to test something. If we want to pilot a video program or a video series, you know, we would do that, and we would do all the research to say, you know, meta data is important. Your titles and your tags and all of your stuff in that video is really important. And so it goes beyond a paid versus organic approach. So typically those decisions are made on an annual basis. With digital, things move so quickly on the interactive side that we have to be the champions to say, hey, this can't wait until next year's planning. We have to do this like right now. And so that's kind of how those situations are handled. So right now, the way it's structured is we've got, you know, a lot of money in a bucket, right? And our CEO, Scott Anderson, unfortunately, our bucket of marketing and advertising falls in the same bucket as sponsorships. And so, as you probably know, Zions Bank's really involved in the community. We're like the sponsors on everything, which is kind of annoying sometimes, but we're so involved in the community. I shouldn't say it's annoying. It's like, oh yeah, I'm not surprised that Zions is sponsoring X event. I mean, we've got a lot of resources, budget specifically, devoted to sponsorships. And so at the beginning of every year, we have this big bucket that says, here's all the money you have for advertising and for sponsorships. And so that level, the ratio of sponsorship to advertising fluctuates every year because Scott will go out to the community and say, hey, I love your cause, I want to support it. And so that makes our advertising budget go down. So that's kind of how it's structured right now. Yeah, I mean, it is. It's a different, like top of the funnel type of awareness mechanism is sponsorships. It's huge. I mean, it's one of the reasons why we have the top bank brand awareness that people know Zions Bank in Utah and most recently in Idaho. We just sponsor everything. And it's a very different strategy. People don't spend a lot of money in sponsorships, but we do, and that has its own benefits. So, yeah.
All right, thank you very much.
Cool. Thanks, guys.